It's another Raw video from your favorite YouTube scout, Draft Raw Authentic. Yes, I am finally here making another video, and like I said, it's a Raw one. So, there will be no edits. Now, I am planning on doing some more stuff with edits and everything. I'm coming up on almost a year since I've been doing this YouTube channel. Thank you for everybody that subscribed, everyone that shared the video, everyone that has tried to help my channel get bigger. I thank y'all for that. But let's get down to business. Now, this video is going to be about offensive linemen. Offensive line in the NFL. Pretty much I just want to talk about and explain like what has happened with offensive lines in the NFL. I remember back in the day, not even 5 years ago, or I'll say around that 5 years ago timeline, there was a good amount of offensive lines in the league that were actually good. And it's kind of weird what has happened over the years. It's like within these drafts, there hasn't been the same number or level of players that have come out since back in the day. The simple fact is that, like, we see that in the NFL right now, honestly, literally, probably the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Dallas Cowboys, and maybe even the Tennessee Titans got the best offensive line in terms of at least having the whole offensive line being pretty darn solid. Them knowing how to work together and stuff like that. And so I started thinking to myself, like, what has happened? There was at least at one point half the teams in the NFL had really good offensive line, and then the other half, it was, I would have to say maybe half of that, probably 8 teams that had, not so great offensive lines, while the other 8, they had solid offensive lines that were okay because they always had like at least 1 or 2 really good Pro Bowl type offensive linemen, and then the rest of them weren't really that good. Injuries kind of work into the factor into why some offensive lines are not as good each and every year, but the weirdest thing is that a lot of these offensive lines have turned out to be not as good. Maybe you get one Pro Bowl type of offensive lineman, and then the rest of them are not as good as that they should be. A lot of these guys are rated out as being just okay players, and not at least above. They're not above average. They're just okay. Honestly, you want good to elite type of offensive lineman. When you're building an offensive line for a team. So I had to question what is wrong with offensive lines in the league. And I started thinking to myself, I had to say, okay, well, let's take a look back into, I guess you could say, left tackles being drafted. The reason why I have to go with left tackles is because that is one of the most important positions on a line. And all the positions are important. To me, it's left tackle, then it's center, and then it's, the 2 guards and right tackle. Right tackle may actually be the most, the position that is probably not the most highest rated position for when you're creating an offensive line, but because you can get away with having a okay right tackle, but you can't get away with having an okay left tackle or okay center and stuff like that. You need to have, above average, really, really good to almost elite players at those type of positions. So I said, well, let me look at the left tackles. And the reason why I said that is I look in the league itself and I think, okay, Tyron Smith, I think Trent Williams, and then I got stuck. And I said, hold on. Maybe it's the left tackle position that is the reason why these offensive lines are not so good. So, with doing that, I had to do my research. Now, I'm not going to sit here, I only named 2 guys because those 2 guys are like really elite. And there's some other good players out there. David Bakhtiari, Teron Armstead. You have a lot of other like really good type of players in these drafts. But overall, I had to look at, well, besides those guys, the two guys that I named were high first round picks. So I have to say, well, what has happened to the high first round pick left tackles, and why those players have been a little bit more important, and why they have actually contributed to why offensive lines have not been great. So I said to myself, well, what year where offensive linemen were not that good, or left tackles weren't that great? And I thought 2013. And the reason I thought 2013 is because the top three tackles drafted that were projected to be left tackles in the NFL, or at least somewhat around there, Lane Johnson has just been a right tackle. I don't know if they don't trust him to make the switch to a left tackle, but he's only been a right tackle in the league. Luke Joeckel and Eric Fisher. Luke Joeckel is one of the worst offensive linemen drafted that high. And Eric Fisher, who I thought was going to be really, really good in the league as a left tackle, has turned out to be pretty average. So I said, okay, well, I can start there. But then I said to myself, you know what? Let me start 3 years ahead of time. And let me get a perspective of, how long has this actually been going on? Because it's not just all of a sudden that year happened and then offensive lines were just bad. No, I had to say to myself, well, let me start 3 years ahead and then get a perspective of these offensive linemen, these left tackles or projected left tackles, and how they've turned out over the years to come. So I started with the 2010 draft. And honestly, I started with just first round picks. And then I ended up looking at, okay, and then after that, what players that were drafted at least by the third round, not further down the third round, but at least by the third round, it actually turned out to be pretty good or left tackles in the league. So I started with 2010, and Trent Williams, who on some people's board was rated as the number 2 or number 3 offensive tackle, I said his name is the best offensive tackle, and he was the first one taken. After that, a guy that was considered consensus to be the number 1 tackle in that draft, Russell Okung, was taken after him. And Russell Okung has actually turned out not to be great. The simple fact is that he's been on 3 teams since he's come into the league. When he was with Seattle, he kind of did not live up to expectations. And that's one of the biggest reasons why he's been on 3 teams. And he's about to be on another team unless he retires, because I hear that the LA Chargers will probably get rid of Russell Okung. He's one of those guys where it's like, that's a player that, hey, as a top-rated left tackle, he didn't turn out to be as good as he should have been. Then further down, I think the 23rd pick, the Packers drafted Brian Bulaga. Now, Brian Bulaga was an okay tackle, but he's kind of turned out to being just a right tackle, and I'm not sure if he's still in the league anymore. I can't remember if he even became a guard later on in his career. I think he did, but I could be wrong about that. But with Bulaga, this is a guy that the Packers were looking at to possibly being a left tackle. Like, maybe he doesn't have the great feet, but maybe he could really just kind of work his way up to eventually be taking over that job in about 2 years. And he never did. And yeah, he wasn't an elite top round pick in terms of the first round, but with Bulaga, they did expect something out of him. Another player that was in that draft was Jared Veldheer, who in the beginning of his career as a left tackle, he was one of the better left tackles, and then he ended up kind of just dwindling out, and I think he's out of the league, or now he's just a right tackle, and it's kind of sad in a way, because Oakland Raiders spent the 3rd round pick on him, had him, good left tackle, then started really deteriorating, went to the Arizona Cardinals, and it was just over from there. And we see how his career turned out, but he was just a guy that, when you're a 3rd round pick or when you're a later round pick like that, you're not expected to be a really good tackle in the draft. You're not expected to be that type of player. And with Jared Veldheer, he ended up kind of becoming that guy and then not becoming that guy. And so when you have that guy on your team and he's not as elite as some of the other tackles that was coming out, and he does play tackle pretty good, it's like, okay, yeah, you got ourselves to left tackle. But at the same time, how elite is this guy going to be? Is it going to be a perennial Pro Bowler? Is it going to be a perennial guy that's going to be starting for your team for years to come? Which, in Jared Veladier's situation, he wasn't. So let's move on to the 2011 draft. Now, the first one was Tyron Smith. I said his name already. One of the best left tackles in the league. Yeah, basically. Then next was guys like Nate Solder and Anthony Costanzo and Gabe Carini and Derek Sherrod. Now, Nate Solder and Anthony Costanzo are two left tackles that, they weren't picked. Nate Solder was still picked in the top 20. I think Anthony was like 22. So it's in that range, top 25 picks. But with both of those players, they were pretty solid left tackles. The only thing with both of them is that they're average, like really average type of left tackles, and they're not guys that turn out to be great or elite. Now, with that being said, they are two guys that were picked late first round. It wasn't like both these guys were high first round picks. But at the same time, when you look at it, like I said, when you're picking up a tackle or a left tackle within the first round, a guy that you projecting to eventually be a left tackle for your team, you want these guys to eventually become elite. If not elite, just pretty darn good. And both of these guys were pretty darn good, but they kind of just average. They kind of just stayed at their top 16 tackles in the NFL, and that's not good enough, honestly. Now, if y'all say top 16 tackles in the NFL and the 16th best tackle is a really good tackle, then we're looking at better offensive lines in the NFL. What happens, and I just want to explain this, what happens is when you don't have a good left tackle, you have to use a later round pick or a guy that should actually project as a right tackle because your left tackle just could not get the job done, the one that you drafted. What happens is those later round picks or undrafted players that do become left tackles end up, what happens is they end up being a left tackle, but it pushes everything else down. Sometimes when you have those situations where you can grab a college tackle and switch him to guard, now that guy has to play tackle, and the guards from college have to definitely play guards, and so on and so on. What happens is a lot of times the best guards in the NFL were former tackles. You get those left tackles or right tackles that you say need to kick an inside. But then when you don't have those elite guards in college, there's usually not a lot of elite guards in the NFL. Usually, like I said, they're tackles turned into guards that become elite in the NFL. Like I said, what happens is just those guys just don't. It pushes down everything. So if I draft an elite left tackle, that means that I grab another left tackle from college, I could put him at left guard. I grab another one the next year, and I could put him at right tackle. Then let's say there was an elite guard, and I was able to take that guard from college and put him at right guard, and I had got a center from whatever driving. Then all of a sudden, your offensive line is perfect. Take away that left tackle. Now that left tackle has to play left guard or right tackle, and you have to choose one of those right tackle or left guard to play, and then it's not as good. They may be better than the guy that you wanted to be left tackle, but they're still not as good, and that's what happens in the NFL. And then sometimes those guys that were supposed to be elite left tackles from college going into the NFL end up not even being that great of a guard. So you just get a snowball effect that just affects every single team in the NFL because you don't have the right tackles coming out in college and being the elite players that you want them to be. And that's what happens with Gabe Carini and Derek Sherrod. Now, James Carpenter was another guy in 2011 that was drafted, but the reason why I didn't say his name is because he was never projected as a left tackle. That's the other thing. I'm not using players' names that were never projected to being left tackles for a certain team. Gabe Carini, we knew he would be a right tackle, but the Bears wanted him to play left tackle. Derek Sherrod, another situation. They chose him because they found out Brian Bulaga wasn't a good left tackle, so they said, let's get Derek Sherrod, who could be a good left tackle, and he ended up not being a good player, and he's out of the league. So it's a snowball effect. Then in 2012, top 3 pick, Matt Khalil, this is where it starts to get bad. Matt Khalil had a good rookie season and then has been trash ever since. Riley Reef was drafted later in that round, I think like 23rd overall, and he ended up He's ended up being a left tackle for the Vikings, which he's not that bad, but it's still not an elite type of left tackle. He is a right tackle. He was a right tackle for the Detroit Lions, and he was a pretty solid right tackle. So you have a situation where they projected him to possibly be a left tackle, and he never really kind of got up to that point. He stayed at a right tackle. He went to the Vikings, became a left tackle, but he's an okay left tackle. He's definitely above average. I'll just say he's an above average. He's a good above average left tackle, but he's still not what the Vikings would need at that position. And it's kind of funny that they drafted someone earlier in that draft, Matt Khalil, and didn't turn out to be that guy, and now they're using a later round pick for the same position, and he's okay. He's not really that guy for them, and to me, they definitely need to get better at the position, especially if you can take a guy like Reef and put him at the left guard position, then your whole offensive line looks a whole lot better. Then in the second round, both Jonathan Martin and Cordy Glenn has turned out to being a really good tackle for when he was with the Bills. Now he's with the Bengals, and he's still not a bad player. So that was a good pick for the Bills to get a left tackle like that. But once again, he's a later round guy, and there's a reason he was chosen later in that draft. Jonathan Martin is the last one of that bunch. In terms of he was drafted in the second round, and he was definitely projected to being a left tackle at one point, and he just never got to that point. So it is what it is. Then in 2013, I already named the three players earlier in this video, so I already gave the perspective, but Teron Armstead, the third round pick, actually became the better player or the best left tackle in this draft. So it's another situation where, like I said, you don't have your top three tackles are not the good left tackles. It's the third round pick. And he's the type of dude that he comes from a small school, and he had to work his way up to being an elite left tackle. And he is an elite left tackle, but it was one of those situations where, like I said, the simple fact is that those top guys are supposed to be elite guys, and it helps out the rest of the league, helps out the rest of the offensive lines in the NFL, and it's not doing its job. In 2014, Greg Robinson, terrible player. I never liked Greg Robinson coming out. I thought he was overrated, and we see why he's not a good left tackle. He plays guard now. I think he kind of does. He just kind of went back to left tackle. He's still not that great of a player. Jake Matthews has been an average left tackle for the Atlanta Falcons. I like Jake Matthews a lot coming out. I think that he's still a solid left tackle. He's not terrible, and I would just say that. He's just not a terrible. He's not terrible. I would say he's above average. Better than okay, definitely above average. It's pretty solid, good, but not. He's not good. He's just kind of just at that right there, being a above average good player, but not a good / great player. Dan Taylor Lewan has been a surprise in this league. I think 14th overall, 13. I don't know where he was picked, but is one of those guys. Tennessee Titans, they got a good left tackle when they chose a guy like Taylor Lewan. So that's a top pick that actually turned out to be good. So it's kind of funny looking at this. Some guys that were picked later in rounds actually just recently turned out to be better. Like Cordy Glenn and Riley Reef has been better than Matt Khalil, and they were picked way later than Matt. Lane Johnson and Teron Armstead are better than Luke Joker and Eric Fisher. Taylor Lewan and Jake Matthews is better than Greg Robinson. Like, it just kind of, it's kind of snowballs. Then in 2015, Eric Flowers, trash. Cedric Ogbuehi's trash. Donovan Smith has been okay. So 2015, another year, just like 2013, it didn't produce no good left tackles. And then in 2016, John Conklin, he's a right tackle. I just put his name there anyway, just to put his name there. But he's been a really good right tackle in the league. But Ronnie Stanley, Laramie Tunsil, Taylor Decker. And the funny thing is that Taylor Decker has probably been the best left tackle from that group. Ronnie Stanley, I will put at number 2, and Laramie Tunsil at number 3. And Laramie Tunsil was rated higher than all of those guys. So it's kind of funny that Laramie Tunsil, who was rated higher, got picked at 3rd as a tackle or 2nd as a left tackle, but he was the highest rated one in a lot of people's boards, who I wasn't a big fan of Laramie Tunsil. I was a bigger fan of Ronnie Stanley, and Stanley and Taylor Decker has turned out to be better players than him. So it goes to show, like, some things that has happened recently in the NFL. I plan to stop in 2016 because I can't really rate players that have only played 1 to 2 years in the NFL, and because the 2016 draft players, they've all played 3 years in the NFL now. So That's why I'm gonna just stop there. But overall, I just look at these guys and looking at these players, and it's alarming that over the years it's gotten worse and worse. Literally 2010, 2011, it was a pretty solid year for the top guys that got drafted. But then once you smooth to 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, you didn't get none, or it was a situation where the guys that did become the better left tackles in that draft were later round picks, where you know they're not as elite at the position in terms of they don't have the longest arms, or they don't have the greatest feet, or they may not have the greatest strength. So it's kind of funny how that is kind of that it has happened like that. That over the years, like I said, that the left tackle position has gone down so bad that it has had affected all of the offensive lines within the NFL, and that's why in the NFL, offensive line play has been pretty darn bad. I mean, the simple fact that for the first time ever, a defensive tackle has won, and I don't know if this is the first time ever, but has won Defensive Player of the Year, but has had, I think he ended with 19 and a half or 20 sacks. Aaron Donald. The simple fact is that has happened. A defensive tackle's done that. That's pretty bad. That just means that, like I said, when you can get a okay left tackle in college and make him to a guard, it helps out. But when you can't do that because the left tackle you chose earlier as a high that you expect to be a left tackle doesn't turn out to be that great, and now he has to play guard and he's still not great, it affects the whole thing. And we've seen J.J. Watt over the years get a bunch of sacks. We've just seen a lot of interior guys get the sacks that they have, and it has affected this league so much. It has affected it so much to where, like I said, all of a sudden, when you look at over the years, guys that projected to be left tackles and what they have become, it's pretty sad that none of these guys have been great for any of these teams, and they're still looking for that left tackle. So anyway, if you like this video, I know it was long, but if you like this video, please comment. If you have anything to say about this, if you like it, please hit that like button. Please share this video, and please, people, please subscribe. I'm trying to build this channel. I'm telling you, when this year come up in March, the videos will get better. I promise you that. I'm telling you right now, I'm working on something. The other thing that I had planned didn't really fall through, but right now it's not the good time because I got the baby and everything, my newborn. So anyway, once again, this is Draft Raw Authentic. I thank you guys for watching. Goodbye.